Dawn came thin and colorless over the lower Jordan, the kind of light that makes a river look colder than it is. Men stood in silence on the bank, faces turned east toward a wall of water swollen by spring. The river was out of its channel, licking at tamarisk roots and swallowing the low ground in long, brown breaths. Somewhere across that water, Jericho sat behind its walls. On this side, families had been up since the last watch, rolling tents, tying water skins, and waiting for a signal that would send them, for the first time in 40 years, toward a land they had only heard described. At the front stood 4 priests under the weight of poles cut to shoulder length. The poles slid through rings on a gold-plated chest, kept under layered cloth. The ark had traveled with them from Sinai, through sand and camp smoke, through complaints and funerals and the long reburying of a generation. Men at the rope line kept the crowd back. Officers moved through the ranks, repeating orders that had been given last night by torchlight. Keep a distance of about 2,000 cubits from the ark. Do not rush the priests. Do not break the line. Consecrate yourselves. Mothers pulled their children close and retied headscarves. Old men who remembered setting out as boys leaned on staffs and tried to see the far bank through mist. Joshua walked the front like a workman measuring a foundation. He had taken command after Moses died east of here, and he carried himself the way a man does when the past is too large to look at and the future leaves no room to turn around. He had sent instructions to the officers on the 3rd day after they reached the river. When you see the priests lift the ark, move out. Now he stopped beside the men under the poles and spoke low enough that only those nearest could hear. "Step into the Jordan," he said. It had the weight of an order and something else in it, a promise he had repeated to the leaders the night before. "Today you will know that the Lord is among you, and that he will drive out the peoples ahead of you." The priests adjusted their grip. The first foot hit water. There is no sound that prepares you for a river at flood. It smothers small noises and turns speech into pantomime. The first priest took a step deeper and planted his heel against the current. The second found his footing and brought the front pole level. The third stumbled and recovered. The water pushed hard at their knees, then against their thighs. Around them, the current threw little tongues of white. The men on the rope line held their breath and watched the ark tilt and settle with each step. A boy climbed a rock to see better, and his father pulled him down by the collar. What happened next, the record says in clean language, spread up the valley faster than a runner. The water stopped. Not a pause or a trickle or a narrowing, but a stoppage that began upstream at a place called Adam, near Zarethan, where the river runs fast between banks of clay. There the flow rose and heaped upon itself into a kind of wall. Below the priests, the current slackened, then broke into puddled pools that slipped away toward the Dead Sea until the riverbed lay open, stone and silt glistening in a long, browning curve. The mud that should have swallowed a man's feet took weight like packed earth. The priests moved to the center and stood, breathing hard, the ark high on their shoulders. Joshua's signalers swept their arms forward. The people stepped off the bank in a width you could measure in tribes. A line of families moved past the men holding the ark. Reubenites and Gadites who had sworn to cross armed, though their homes would remain east. Ephraimites and Benjaminites who had carried the bones of Joseph through the desert because an oath had been made to bring him home. Judahites who had learned that their strength was counted in small obediences over long miles. Children kept asking if they were allowed to touch the stones. "Go," their mother said. "Keep walking. Do not stop in the middle to pick anything up." On the far bank, men from Jericho climbed the wall and stared south along the riverbed at the black line of people crossing where water should have been. Word had arrived days earlier that the Lord had dried up the Red Sea for this people when they came out of Egypt. Those were old stories from soldiers' mouths. This was different. This was water on their doorstep with its back broken as if a blade had been laid across it. In Jericho, hearts melted and courage failed, the way a shout can leave a man's throat before he knows he is afraid. Midway through the crossing, Joshua called for the 12 men he had named the night before, one from each tribe, men who understood that a stone can be an argument as strong as a law. He sent them back toward the priests and told each to lift a rock from the riverbed and carry it on his shoulder to the place where they would camp. The stones were not chosen for beauty. They were chosen because they had been under water a moment before and would be dry by night, and would keep their color under the sun when children's hands touched them years hence. Joshua also set 12 stones where the priests stood, a low circle you would only be able to see when the river ran shallow. The line did not break. Hours passed, and the sound of sandals on river rock took on a rhythm. The men with spears kept the pace. The goats slid and scrambled and were hauled by their horns. A woman, whose husband had died in the 40th year, stopped to straighten his son's pack in the center of the river and then moved on without looking at the priests, because looking at them would have turned her legs to water. By late day, the last of the people had reached the bank opposite Jericho. The sun came down warm on beards and shoulders. Joshua told the priests to come up. When the soles of their feet touched dry ground on the west side, the water ran again. It did not slosh or creep. It returned to its course the way a door shuts against a gust. Downstream, reeds bowed and straightened as the flow bit back into its banks. The place where the priests had stood darkened and then disappeared. Children who had been allowed to run back to the edge pointed and laughed, the relief in the sound too strong to hide. Men who had held their faces still all day exhaled and did not mind who saw them do it. They camped at Gilgal on the eastern edge of Jericho, the ground hard with scrub and the sky low and wide. Joshua took the 12 stones and set them there. When your sons ask their fathers in time to come, "What do these stones mean?" you will tell them, he said, that Israel crossed here on dry ground. He did not raise his voice for that. He spoke as men speak when they are stacking evidence they expect will be tested. That night the camp ate roasted grain from a land that would soon be theirs, the last of the old food already given, and the first of the new not yet planted. The day had other results a report would not miss. The people feared Joshua as they had feared Moses, because the work matched the promise. Officers counted fighting men and checked sling cords and spear points. Scouts watched Jericho's gates and saw that no one went out and no one came in. An entire nation went to sleep in the smell of river water drying on clothes and leather, and woke to the taste of dust and a silence more complete than before. Behind them, the flood had returned to its spring width, as if no foot had ever touched the channel. In front of them, a wall waited. It is easy to call a river a boundary. For the people who stepped into it that day, it was a courtroom and a witness. They had marched after a wooden chest through desert for years, because a voice at the mountain had ordered a people into existence and told them where they would live. Now the same chest had gone into a flood on poles carried by tired shoulders, until the soles of priests' feet hit silt and everything impossible became simple underfoot. They crossed not as raiders, but as heirs, and the river kept the record of their passage, the way a scar keeps the shape of a blade that made it. Later, when Jericho shut its gates, and the ram's horn sounded, and the walls did what walls do when order meets command, men would remember another sound, the hush that fell when water stopped. Outsiders would hear the story cut short and suppose it to be an exaggeration. Insiders would point to the stones at Gilgal and name the 12 men who had carried them. The crossing was not an argument won on paper. It was an event witnessed by a city on the far bank and by a nation in the channel, an event that tied their father's sea to their own river and tied both to a future mapped in advance. A people came to the edge of something they could not pass, and they were told to step in first and watch second. The priests did not move quickly or slowly. They moved until the ground made room. The crowd did not surge or panic. They filed until there were none left to cross. The officers did not give speeches. They repeated distances and cautions and kept children from running. And when it was done, the river ran as it had before, and the only new things were 12 stones, a camp on the west bank, and the knowledge that the way forward would be taken the same way the river had been, 1 foot down, then another, until the impossible was behind them. Thank you for listening to Divine Crime. Subscribe for more true stories from the most dangerous book ever written.